Hey guys, whenever you watch one of my videos, you may see this thing. This is the TTArtisan Light Meter II, a tiny on-camera light meter that I use to expose my film photography. And today I want to talk about it. I got this thing in October of last year, and since then I've been using it to figure out the correct settings to use on my film cameras. I mentioned this thing on the channel a few times, but I never talked about it too much. So I wanted to make an entire video about it, because over the months I've been noticing some important advantages to using a device like this, but I also noticed some shortcomings, and I want to talk about it in case some of you guys might be looking to get into film photography on a budget, or are looking to level up their film photography on a budget. I wanted to talk about if this thing is maybe right for you. I even wore my Petapixel merch today, so you guys know I mean business. And I also want to talk about some tips I have on how to get the most out of this thing and how to use it in the best way possible, because I've made some mistakes and maybe you don't need to make them. I should probably give a little disclaimer before we start, because of course I only started doing film photography a few months ago. It's not even been a year yet, and of course this is also the only light meter like this that I bought and used, so I can't really compare this to other light meters that are on the market right now, but I can still give some insights on how it is to use this thing and the results I've been getting with it. And we will compare to one alternative as well. So as I'm just gearing up to take a shot of some trees over here, let's talk about what this thing even does. So the TTArtisan Light Meter II is built to help you find the correct settings to use for your photographs to make sure they're not too bright or too dark. The way this is achieved is you set the eyes of the film you loaded on this little top dial right here with this weird knob. Then you will point your camera at the scene you're trying to photograph and press the button on the back to take a reading of the brightness of the scene. Now you have a dial for your aperture and a dial for your shutter speed, which you can now play around with. So one thing to remember, this thing only takes a reading when I press this button. So if I now press the button and turn the camera away, it doesn't know the brightness here, it remembers the brightness over there, and it will remember that until I press the button the next time. These three indicator lights on top of here will start to light up depending on the settings you've set. If you only see a red plus, then your settings are too bright. If you only see the red minus, then your settings are too dark. If you see the green dot in the middle, then your settings are good, your shot is properly exposed. If you see both the green dot and the red plus, that means you're overexposed within one step, and green dot and red minus means underexposed within one step. And now you can play around with these settings to find the combination of aperture and shutter speed you would like to use, where you see the green dot, and then you know your shot is properly exposed. So let me do that. 500th of a second at 5.6. Now I will put these settings in here on my camera, and I will take the shot. So you might be asking, why do I even need something like this? One of the first things I realized when I started collecting vintage cameras like this one is that one of the first things that always seems to break is the internal light meter on the camera, or if you have a really old one, it might not even have one. Ironically, the camera we're using today is like the only one I own that has a functional light meter, but that's because I will use it for some demonstrations later, because we will compare those two things. This thing costs about 72 euros, which makes it one of the cheaper options, if not the cheapest option right now, compared to other on-camera light meters like this one. There are some pretty expensive ones out there. But of course, 72 euros is still more than free. And the option I used before I bought this thing is an app on my phone. What's up, guys? Where I can use my phone as a light meter to figure out which settings to use, which of course is either less expensive, like maybe 5 euros, or free, as the one I'm using. So why did I even buy this thing? Well, it mostly comes down to personal preference. So for one, many of these old cameras like this one really need both of your hands on there to operate them properly. If I have my phone in my one hand, how am I now going to change my aperture up here? It doesn't work. It's just way more enjoyable to be able to have both of your hands on the camera at all times. You can take your measurements here, put the settings in right away. It's just way more convenient than having one of your hands preoccupied with your phone. Then you can't change any settings. It's just better in that way. Also, pulling out your phone every time you want to take a picture also just kind of takes your attention away from the camera, from the shot. Just is more of a distraction, which I didn't want. I didn't want to have to operate a second device while using my camera. I wanted all of my attention and all of my hands to be on the camera when I'm doing photography, and this thing allows me to do that. There still is some advantages to the app though, and we will talk about some things where I do still use the app for certain shots. So I think I just found a nice spot to demonstrate one of the shortcomings I wanted to talk about. And it's not really like a shortcoming, but just something you should keep in mind if you think about buying this thing. So I hope you can see, am I pointing? Yeah, this kind of dark area here in the trees, right? Which is a lot darker than the surrounding area. So let's just say I wanted to take this thing off, and I wanted to slap on the big old 200mm telephoto lens to really zoom in on this dark area in the trees. I don't know why I would do that. There isn't really anything interesting there, but let's just pretend that there was something there. So what problem would I be having there? So this thing has a measurement angle of about 45 degrees in front of here, which is, as I understand it, about equivalent to a 35mm lens. Now I've used this thing with 35mm lenses, 50mm, 28mm, and I usually don't have any problems with any of these. But let's say we want to use something like this, a 200mm telephoto lens, and just on pure coincidence, we are zooming in on the darkest area of this area. Let's just see what the internal light meter of this camera thinks I should be using. So it wants to use about f4. Okay, let's set that. Let's try to focus this. Oh, I forgot how stupid this thing is to use, man. I did. Yup. And let's hope I can get a somewhat sharp shot. Alright. Now pointing it in the same direction with the TTArtisan Light Meter. And at 60th of a second it wants me to use, holy hell, f11. Is that true? It is, alright, sure. f11 it is. Let me go ahead and... So I don't know how this is going to turn out. I'm going to have to wait for the film to be developed, of course. But you can already tell that the internal light meter, which of course knows what this lens is roughly looking at, knows that I'm photographing a pretty dark area and I should be using f4. But this TTArtisan Light Meter, because it is at about the equivalent of a 35mm lens, I mean, a 35mm would have all of this in the frame. The sky, those brighter bushes down there, which means that it is expecting a lot of a brighter shot than I'm actually taking. Hello guys, you see me obviously on a different day. Let's just see me setting up this shot here to try and prove another point, or rather to try and give you another recommendation. So I'm out here with the camera. You see the sun going down there behind me. This is one of my favorite spots to photograph a sunset or to film during a sunset. And what we will be doing is I will try to take a self-portrait. Of course, I'm again gonna exaggerate a bit to make my point, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sit on that little rock formation back there, nice in the shade of the tree. And right behind me is going to be the sunset. That's not going to cause any issues at all with measuring the light. Again, I'm purposefully putting this light meter in a situation where I know it's not going to succeed, but I hope I'm going to prove the point that I'm trying to prove and prove to you why you should be doing this. I want to shoot this at f5.6, so let me take just the light measurement the way I'm going to take the shot, and it's going to tell me that at f5.6 f8 1/1000th of a second. Yeah, okay. Let's just do this. And since this camera is a self-timer, then I'm gonna need to find, here it is. Okay, let's just listen to what this light meter is saying and take this shot at f8 1/1000th of a second. Ready? Run! All right. Again, I'm gonna need to wait to see how the picture turned out, but if I were to give an assumption based on my experience of using this camera so far, I'm gonna assume that my face was probably pretty dark, if not even completely invisible. because my back was towards the sunlight, I was in the shade, and behind me there's the very bright sun, which this shot is going to be mostly exposed for. Well, this truly was a very scuffed experiment. I somehow managed to stand in the exact spot where there would be lens flare, so even if I did expose this image properly, you wouldn't see my face regardless. But I think you can still kind of see what I'm trying to show here. And again, this isn't supposed to be some sort of criticism of the TTArtisan Light Meter. I'm purposefully putting it in like the worst situation possible. But if you are a beginner film photographer watching this video and thinking about buying this light meter, I want you to know about some of the mistakes I as a beginner film photographer have made when I first bought this light meter, and maybe you can avoid making them as well. I guess I just want you to be aware of the measurement angle. I want you to be aware of what it is that you are measuring, and I want you to know how this is going to affect your images. And maybe if you are the type of photographer that uses a lot of long telephoto lenses or wants to measure one spot in your scene really precisely, then maybe this is just a bit too wide for you. But for what I usually shoot, landscapes with 28, 35 or 50mm lenses, this is really great. I did still want to make this video showing you some of these situations where I struggle using this light meter and where I will opt for the app instead. But again, for I want to say 90% of the photography I do, this is really great. And well, how do you get the most out of that? I do want to give some quick tips here before the sun fully goes down, which is not long, so we have to hurry up. So tip number one, if you're walking around with your camera around your neck doing photography, I would recommend that while you're walking, it's not hard to just press this button on the back of here a few times, just every now and then press the button, not a lot of effort, and have the settings you currently have set on your camera, set on here on the light meter, and just press it and look down real quick at the lights. And that's going to give you a good overview of if your settings are still good for the current lighting conditions or not. That's going to speed you up a bit because you don't have to wait for a shot to be in front of you and then you have to start measuring and doing all of this and all of that and all of that, and you may miss some moments or stuff like that. You can constantly keep on checking if the lighting conditions have changed or if your settings are still correct, and if they are still good, then you can shoot right away without having to worry about it because you know you just measured and everything is still fine. So that's one tip I would give. Just constantly keep on checking if your settings are still good for the current light conditions while you are walking. Can you see those trees? Yes, you can. What I like to do is I won't expose for the actual shot I'm taking. What I do is I frame up my shot, I tilt the camera down, take the measurement, figure out my settings that way, then I can tilt my camera back up, take my shot. That's because typically, on a bright sunny day especially, the sky is going to be brighter than the ground, which means that you're going to have situations where the ground is just way too dark, you can't actually see the placement of your photographing properly, but then the sky is probably exposed because, again, the light meter is just considering all of that. And typically what you would prefer is, if anything, the sky might be blown out, that's fine. You want to make sure that the ground is properly exposed. For one, because film, you may have heard it before, holds detail better in the highlight, in the shadows, it's kind of washed out and all of that. You want to avoid that, and in general you just want to avoid the type of shot that I've taken so many times now where you have just a black landscape and then there is a properly exposed sky or sun in the shot. It's especially bad when photographing sunsets in the direction of the sun, as I've just done. Because then you also have the sun directly shining into the light meter, and all of the land and trees and whatever are going to be so underexposed. I can show you right here. I took those pictures with the internal light meter on this camera on the beach on a vacation, and I mean, you will see this shot I exposed for the actual shot I was taking, and you can see how dark that ground is because the sun was just kind of throwing off the exposure that way. But then tilting the camera down towards the ground as I'm taking the reading, that's how it looks. So that's way better. You want to avoid underexposing the ground, so my general tip is to tilt the camera downwards as you're taking the exposure. You may have also heard the old tip of expose for the shadows. That's one of the first things you will hear when watching film photography tutorials on YouTube. That's again something that's not necessarily possible with this light meter, since you are not exposing for a certain spot that you could choose. You're exposing at that 45-degree angle. The way you can kind of work around this is, let's say I want to take a shot including half of this tree and then half of this very bright sky back there. So I guess I can just show you, pointing it here. this direction. Let's take a measurement. What do you want me to shoot at? That's a f8 250th. All right. Gorgeous shot. But let me show you how you could do that better. One tip I would give is to, in a similar way to tilting the camera downwards, just tilt the camera towards the darker spot of your scene. So now I'm tilting it towards this tree. Make sure I'm including more of the tree in my exposure measurement rather than the sky. And now it's going to tell me to use, wow, f4 125th, and that sounds very more fitting. So let's take the shot again. Worst picture I've ever taken, but I hope I can prove a point that you can't really expose for the shadows necessarily, but if there is a spot in your scene that's a lot darker than the rest, you can tilt your camera towards that dark spot. Make sure you're including more of that in your light measurement to make sure that darkness is kind of accounted for, I guess. And if that darker spot is just the ground as opposed to the sky, then just tilt it downwards. And in general, I like to just make sure if there's anything that's really bright, like the sky, like the sun, I'm just not including that at all, if possible. And it may be blown out, but you avoid having the type of shot that I've taken hundreds of times now, where you have just a black landscape with a properly exposed sun. Congratulations. You want to avoid that, so those are two tips I would give. So let's talk about some more weaknesses of this light meter. So for one, it won't work in any lighting condition. While it is pretty versatile, there is certain situations where I would not recommend using this light meter. For one, at night. So I use this light meter to shoot pictures at night on a Christmas market. Very little light. And the pictures turned out great. Really happy with those. But at a certain point, once the sun was completely gone, this light meter started throwing error messages and not giving me any proper readings, which an error message, these lights just blink. I think I took a video, I can put it in here. That was a problem, and I ended up just kind of guessing which settings I probably should be using. Turned out great, but you know. So while I can actually set this thing to ISO 6400 is the highest one, aperture 2.8, 1 second exposure. I can do that. But in a situation where I would actually need those settings to get a proper shot, I wouldn't actually expect this thing to give proper light meter readings, because it just needs a little bit of light. So if you do a lot of film photography at night, I would not recommend this thing, because it does need a little bit of light to take a proper reading, and at night it can throw these error messages and just not work. Another problem is that you of course need to be able to see those indicator lights to be able to use this light meter, which in extremely bright conditions can be a struggle. Usually I can kind of shield it off with my hand, bring my face a bit closer, then it's fine. But if you're shooting in very bright conditions, it can be very hard to see those lights. I wish they were a bit brighter. I want to say like 80% of the time it's no problem, but it can be pretty annoying when it happens and when you can't really see anything. And of course, compared to something like this, where the light meter is inside of the viewfinder of the camera, no matter how bright it is, I will always be able to see that. That's just not a thing with this one. So anywhere between sunrise and sunset, usually this light meter is fine. But if you shoot at night, I wouldn't recommend this. And in general, I would wish that if TTArtisan ever made a light meter 3, that they would make these indicator lights a bit brighter, or found a different solution where you can see the measurements no matter how bright it gets. I would like that as an improvement for the next model they make. Let's also talk about this ISO dial for just a second, because this was kind of my biggest concern when I got this thing, because it's pretty finicky, and I thought that it would be very easy to turn on accident, and I thought that it would be pretty easy for me to accidentally change my ISO settings throughout the day, but that has never happened. I put this thing in my bag, pull it back out. No matter what I do, I never once encountered a problem that I accidentally changed the ISO setting. So that's fine, even though this dial is pretty easy to turn. One thing that isn't fine is that it just isn't really that precise. It's kind of hard to explain, but I can just say that I wish it was easier to line this up properly, or that the ISO dial was clicked in some way that you can only click it to the actual ISO values, because this thing, the kind of hole you're looking through to see this ISO is just a bit too big, and you could technically set it to ISO 190, 200 40 or whatever, and it would still look like you're set to 200. That probably doesn't have any effect whatsoever on the actual readings you're taking. But I just find it annoying that I constantly keep on thinking I don't have my ISO set properly, and I keep on messing around with this thing, trying to get the best possible setting and whatever, line it up properly. And you can also get conflicting aperture readings depending on if you've lined it up properly or not. That probably doesn't have really any effect, but it's annoying. I wish it was easier to line up, or that the ISO dial was clicked. I hope I could help you, and in case I didn't help you, I hope you at least had fun watching this. And well, we're at the outro screen, so up here I'm gonna have my film photography playlist with all of the film photography videos I've made, testing cameras, using this light meter to do photography, doing film photography, all of that good stuff. And down here I'm just gonna let YouTube decide what it wants to show you. This is what YouTube thinks you will like, so go watch this and I will go watch those deer. Maybe I can get at least a little video for you guys. Goodbye.